So anyway, that was great. It was very easy, and you could get your questions answered. You could get help on things. You could hang around the org. It was kind of a very small, sort of in a dinky little building on 24th Street with a rickety elevator, and you go in, and it was all shades of gray and olive green because Andy Bagley was colorblind. And it didn't matter to me. I thought I had walked through the gates of heaven. I was being accepted by all these Martians, And they were saying, I heard conversations like, oh yes, and I took out my e-meter and I pulled all his Miss Witholds, and his ARC went way up, he came uptone, and he had a floating needle, or he had a clean needle, whatever they had in those days. They had free needles, that's right. And I said, these people really know a lot. I'm in the right place. And I knew that there was a scarcity of ARC on the planet, that people didn't communicate freely with each other. I loved the ARC triangle. It became my stable datum. And then eventually when I went down on course in Washington, D.C., 6 months later or so, well, I'm skipping now, aren't I? And I'm skipping some of the fun part, but I'll just tell you this little story. I went down to the academy. They didn't have one in New York, so I went down to Washington, D.C., and I became friends with this guy named Renz, who was in my building where I lived. Yeah, and he was a gay guy who just happened to be absolutely a genius. And he knew all the data from every single book and every single tape and every single bulletin that Ron ever wrote. And he could tell you the page and the paragraph. He could tell you the number on the tape, where it was, where you stopped the tape. He'd tell you where that datum was. So he was like a mentor for me when I was brand new and just on course learning to be an auditor. And so I'd spend hours with him listening to him, and he would tell me all this incredible tech data. But he never let me be a girly girl. I had to leave my flounciness outside his door, or he wouldn't talk to me. He had a big button on my girly thing. So I thought, okay, well, this man, he doesn't want me to act like a girl, so I'm just going to walk in and be like a Thetan and sit down. And he would tell me these things, and he'd say, thank you, that's very good. He'd acknowledge me for leaving my girly thing outside the door. And so then one day the D of T called me in, and his name was Wayne, and he said, Mary, we understand that you are being friends with Renz. And I said, yes. And he said, do you know that Renz is homosexual? And I said, well, maybe, I guess. I don't know. I didn't ask him. He says, you know, homosexuals are 1.1. And I said, well, I read that, yeah, but also promiscuity. And I must have missed his Witholds right there. You know, that fits the same tone level. So, I don't know. He says, well, we can't let you be friends with him if you want to continue on course. I said, well, I can't not be his friend. And he said, why is that? I said, because it would be I'd be breaking the ARC triangle. It would be a violation of the ARC triangle, which was my stable datum. So he says, oh, well, yeah, but he gave me some reason, and he says, we'll have to take you off course if you insist on being friends with him. I said, well, you just do what you have to do. And that was my first little test, you know, hold my viewpoint, hold my position with these people running things. And so he ended up letting me stay on course. So, thank you. So I learned about not letting go of my integrity right there, right there. Another important lesson I learned when I first came in was I went down, when I first came in, that next weekend or something was the big clearing Congress in Washington, D.C., and Ron was going to be there. So I was going to meet L. Ron Hubbard in person. So all these people from New York were going down on the train, and Valerie was there. She went down, and she was online ahead of me to see Ron in his receiving line. And so when she walked out to him, she said, I will audit. And he said, thank you. And then I walked up to him and I shook his hand, and I didn't want to sound like Valerie, so I said, yeah, I'm going to be an auditor. And he said, thank you. And he had red hair and it flounced, and he was very charismatic and really fun to be around and chatty. And anyway, when he first showed up on the stage, my very first glimpse of Ron, he walked out in a gold lame jacket and a drum roll and a sore thumb. And he held up the thumb and showed everybody, look, I don't have to be perfect. That was the message I got. And I never forgot that. So that helped me get through the next 21 years. But I thought that was very cool. He was... Yeah, never forgot that sore thumb. Okay. Anyway, so he was very, let's say, in the theme of the times, where it was very effusive and fun, and everything was out in the open. And he was teaching about the problems intensive, and that's where the slogan came out, maybe you're not sick, maybe you're just suppressed. And he had a chart there, and he wrote down the prep check buttons and taught us all about prep checking. And then he was talking about GPMs. So he had people come out on the stage dressed up in their favorite whole tract items. And they walked around the stage with, some of them were Vikings. I remember Andy Bagley, he was a Viking. And there were all these different tracky costumes and get-ups and mock-ups and stuff. And they had terminals and opposition terminals. So they'd go around in pairs. And he just demonstrated this live, And that's how I learned, So when I went back to New York, I went into the co-audit, and the co-audit happened to be up at the center up on 77th Street instead of downtown. And the center was a franchise center with Bob Thomas and Stanley Stromfeld and all kinds of interesting people, brilliant people. And they were running their little thing uptown, and we had the org downtown, and they were all friends, and I was able to go back and forth for classes, comm course down here, co-audit up there. It didn't matter. Everybody was friendly. And in that co-audit uptown, they were doing GPM running, which was the old R212, and then it turned into R3M. And R212, you were looking for rock slams, and R3M, you were looking for rocket reads. So we all had to graduate from rock slammers to rocket readers. And, and rock slams were good in those days. As a matter of fact, it was all fun, and seriousness still equaled mass. Okay? Seriousness equaled mass. So you didn't have to be serious because that meant you were in your case and you had mass.